This video is the tutorial for Pallant's SPSS Survival Manual Chapter 8 Homework, Manipulating the Data. I wanted to start here not with the SPSS file, but looking at the homework sheet itself to make sure that you understand what we're talking about, both when you read your Pallant chapter and when you look at the homework sheet. I just want to make sure that you understand why we might need to do what's called reverse code certain items on a scale before we can calculate a total scale score or an average scale score. What we mean by scale, just to remind you, this particular scale is for the perceived control of internal states scale. A scale is made up of items. So in this case, you've got an 18 item scale, and each item is responded to on what's called a Likert scale, from strongly disagree, which is a rating of 1, to strongly agree, which is a rating of 5. If you remember the chapter on survey research in Shaughnessy and Zeigmeister, remember how they talked about you need to, as you write your questions to make up a scale, you need to avoid response set, where subjects will kind of get in a habit of, say, selecting all 4s and 5s or selecting all 1s and 2s for all of the items, rather than reading each of the items carefully. So one strategy that we use when we write items is to kind of reverse the wording and alter the wording such that subjects will have to use both ends of the Likert scale when they respond. So just to pick a couple of items here, if you read the first item, and remember that this scale is perceived control of internal states. So it's assessing the degree to which you think you have some control over your moods and your emotions and to some extent, your thinking. So if I read item 1, I don't have much control over my emotional reactions to stressful situations. Now, if I strongly agree with that and I select 5, that suggests that I have a low perceived level of control over an internal state. In contrast, if I read number 3, my feelings are usually fairly stable. That suggests that if I were to select 5, strongly agree, that I have a high sense of perceived control of internal states. Another example, if I read number 5, no matter what happens to me in my life, I'm confident of my ability to cope emotionally. Again, if I select 5, strongly agree, that suggests that I have a high level of perceived control over my internal states. So you see how number 1 is worded negatively, where you don't have control over emotional reactions. And again, high scores would say you have low perceived control. Now, as the researcher, I ultimately want to be able to either create a total scale score or maybe an average scale score. Regardless of whether it's a total or an average, I want high scores to mean the same thing, meaning I want all of the scores, if they're high, to reflect a high level of perceived control of internal states. I want all low scores to reflect low perceived control of internal states. So that means any item that is negatively worded, such as is the case with number 1, needs to be reversed. And by reversed, what we mean is if a participant answered 5, I'm going to recode that to 1. If they answered 4, I'm going to recode that to 2. 3 stays 3. If they answer 2, I'm going to recode it to 4. If they answer 1, I'm going to recode it to 5. And that's why it's called reverse coding. You're basically taking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and turning it into 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, when I initially wrote this homework assignment, I decided not to have you practice or to do a demo for you of how to do recoding of variables. In retrospect, I kind of wish that I had done that so that you would see how it's done. Guaranteed, well, not guaranteed, pretty likely that when you are doing your senior research, you will have to do some recodes on a variable of some sort. Okay, so I've got my survey.save here, and if I want to do recoding, and transform is the place in SPSS where you do computing new variables, recoding variables, selecting variables, and so on. So I'm going to go to transform, and if I wanted to recode an item, I could go to either recode into same variable. What that means is I would be reverse coding any items that I select, any variables that I select. I would be recoding them and permanently replacing the numbers in the column for that item. If I go recode into different variables, I'm going to give the variable a new name and I'm going to recode the data. Which you do just depends on whether you need to preserve the original data in its original form. Now, just because I'm demoing and I don't want to save a permanent change to variables that I know, in the data set that you were provided with your Pallant text, these variables have already been recoded for you. So we don't want to do the operation over again. I'm going to demo for you how to recode into a new variable though. So what you do after you select recode into new variables or into different variables, then you need to select. So let's say we're going to recode item number 1 for the perceived control of internal states scale. So we're going to select item number 1. And I need to give this a new name and a new value, or a new label. So I'm going to say test recode, or I could call it demo recode or something. So after I've given it a new name, then I can click on old and new values. And since it's a 5-item scale, what you do, the old value, you start with 1, you're going to replace that with 5, and then you click add. With 2, you're going to replace that with 4, and you're going to click add. Just because I'm obsessive and have a need for completeness, I'm going to put 3 to 3, 4 to 2, and 5 to 1. So what I've done is I'm telling SPSS every time a 1 was entered for that variable, replace it with a 5. Every time a 2 was entered, replace it with a 4. A 3 is entered, replace it with a 3. 4 is entered, replace it with a 2. 5 is entered, replace it with a 1. And then I click OK. I did forget that step. Once you put in those new names and the variable label, you do have to click the change button and it will appear here and replace the question mark. I apologize. So after I click OK, what you'll see in the output box is it will give you a record. It will say, I've recoded PC1 into this new variable that I called test recode. And it documents for me what operation I actually performed so that it recodes the variable. So that's an example of how you would do recoding if you were going to do it. Now you can also check and look at your data set from variable view, and you'll see the new variable you just created will show up at the very bottom of your list of variables. If you're in data view, you can go all the way over to the right and you'll see the new variable listed here. Okay, Now we're going to move on to number 2 in homework for chapter 8, and you're going to learn in this part of the homework how to calculate total scale scores. And in this case, what you're going to be doing is calculating what are called subscale scores. So we have a whole set of items for the PCIS, the Perceived Control of Internal States scale. And in the way that scale was designed, there are 3 clusters of items that measure different constructs that make up the perceived control of internal states. So you've got emotion, so control over emotion, control over thoughts, and control over your physical self, so behavior. And each of those, we need to create a separate total score for each one of those. And in the homework, I've identified for you which items go into which scales, and I've given you a new variable name for each one based on the instructions. And then I'm asking you in number 2, after you create those new totals, I want you to do the descriptive statistics. So how do we do this? First, if you're following the instructions that are available for you in your Pallant text, we're going to go up to transform, and we're going to do compute variable. Now our target variable for the first one is the emotion subscale, and we want to call that PCE MOT. So perceived control emote. And we want a total. So we're not going to do any kind of other operations other than addition. So what you're building over here is what's called a numeric expression. So just a little math that you're doing, or basically you're telling SPSS to do for you. The emotion subscale is made up of PC 1 through 6. So you're going to highlight PC 1, and then you go down here and you put a plus sign because we're doing a total. PC 2, PC 3, PC 4, PC 5, and PC 6. And I've already named this new variable PC emote, PCE MOT. And I've got that completely done. I don't need to do anything else. And I hit OK. Now, just like before, the output file is going to show you evidence of what you did. And this can be a way of checking to make sure you didn't make mistakes. So I know that the emotion subscale of the PCIS includes PC 1 through 6. So I can see here PC 1, PC 2, PC 3, PC 4, PC 5, and PC 6. All right, now I go back to my data set. I want to verify for myself that it exists. So here it is, PCE MOT is my new scale, and it is has been created for me as a total scale variable. Now I've asked you to run the descriptive statistics for this new variable. So here you go to Analyze, and you've practiced this before, so it shouldn't be something you don't know how to do. You go to Descriptives, you're going to go all the way down to your new subscale. You're going to put it over on Variables, and we want mean, standard deviation, minimum, and maximum. Mean, standard deviation, minimum, maximum, and hit continue. And then click OK. So those are the values for the first subscale. Now, I'm going to leave you to do the thoughts subscale and the physical subscale on your own. Since I've walked you through the steps for doing the emotion subscale, you can repeat that procedure for the other 2 subscales and for calculating the descriptive statistics for those 2 subscales. All right. For number 3, what we're doing is converting. We're doing a recode, but a different kind of recode operation. This time, what we want to do is change the way marital status is coded in our data set. Since marital status, if you're looking at the homework sheet, marital status has these 8 different options in it. And if you're trying to do between groups comparisons, having 8 groups, if you have lower numbers in some of those groups, it kind of takes away some of your power in being able to do some of the statistical tests that you might want to do to compare groups. So when we look at that, the first thing I've asked you to do is to run the frequencies on the marital status variable and look at how many people fall into each of the original categories. And that will sort of show you what I mean by why this can be problematic if you leave those original 8 categories. So I'm going to go to Analyze Descriptives, Frequencies, and I'm going to select marital status. And I shouldn't need to change anything in terms of the statistics because I just want the frequencies. And this box is already checked, Display Frequency Tables. So when you look at this, you've got a lot of people who are single, even more who are married and they've only been married once. You have much smaller numbers in some of your other groups, particularly the separated group and the widowed group. So what's suggested, and this is what you're going to be doing in number 4 rather, is to recode these groups into people who are in a relationship versus people who are not in a relationship. So when you're thinking of in a relationship, you're talking about people in a steady relationship, people living with a partner, people married for the first time, and people who are remarried. Those are all people currently in a relationship when they filled out the survey. The others are people who are not in a relationship, single, separated, divorced, and widowed. And they'll be coded, that first group, the ones not in a relationship, they're going to be coded as 1s, and the second group are going to be coded as 2s. So this is a somewhat different operation than what we did before, so we're going to demo that for you here next. So we go back to transform, and we're going to do this transformation of the variable, and we're going to call it a new variable, relship, relationship. So we're going to recode into different variables, and we need to hit the reset button. So we're going to get the what is your marital status variable, put that in there. Click change. So you're converting marital status into relship, and then we go to old and new values, and in the instructions I've asked you to take the options single, separated, divorced, and widowed need to be coded as 1s. So single is 1, and I want it to stay a 1, but because I'm compulsive, I'm going to put it there anyway. The next one that I want is separated, so that's a 6. And I want it to also be a 1. The next one is divorced, that's a 7. I also want that to be a 1. And then widowed is the last one. That's an 8. And I want it to be a 1. Then I need to switch gears for my people who are in a relationship. So I want steady relationship, that's 2. It's going to stay a 2. I know, I'm really compulsive. And living with a partner is 3, but I also want that to be 2. Married for the first time is 4. And I want it to be a 2. And then remarried is 5. And I want it to be a 2. So this is the procedure for converting a variable that in the original responses that you could make, you had 8 options that you could choose from. The researchers afterwards are saying it makes more sense from a data analysis perspective for us to just compare people who are in a relationship versus those who are not in a relationship at the present time or at the time they filled out the survey. Now I'm having a little memory lapse. I don't remember when, and I'm guessing that I did this, that I've already computed, or not computed, I've already done this recode, so it may give me an error. You won't get that error because you haven't done that recode yet. At least I'm hoping not. If you do get the error, don't worry about it. We'll deal with it later. So I'm ready to go, and I click OK. It didn't give me a mistake. That's good. So what it shows you here is you've now recreated the new variable, and it's been coded into the relship variable. And then I want you to look at that new variable and run the frequencies. So we go to descriptives, frequencies. I'm going to hit the reset button, go all the way to the bottom where I can find my new variable. I'm going to stick that over there, and I'm going to click OK. So now we've got, even though we don't have equal n in our 2 groups, not even close, but we have better distribution of numbers between these 2 groups. Again, they aren't equivalent. You still have 67% in your group 2, which are the people who are in a relationship, and 33% who are not in a relationship. But that's better than trying to do between groups comparisons with 8 groups, which makes it highly unlikely you're going to be able to interpret the results when you have such unequal numbers of people spread out across those 8 groups. So that concludes my tutorial for the Chapter 8 homework.